All right, so my first question is, why do you want this job?
Well, I want this job because I've seen what it looks like to change systems and change lives. For the past 12 years, have been a school librarian. It's my day job, and I thought that I would always be a school librarian and teach information literacy skills and get books into the hands of kids, and I loved it. And then in 2014, I was sexually assaulted, and I encountered system after system that was broken. The hospital turned me away because they didn't provide rape kits. The police refused to investigate or test the kit I eventually got. The prosecutors blamed and threatened me. And I couldn't walk away from that experience and not do everything that I could to change that, to make sure that what happened to me never happened to anybody else. So I reached out to every lawmaker in the state of Washington, at the federal level, the state, the county, the city. Very few people responded. The two people that did, one was Senator Patty Murray. She brought me in, listened to my story, was appalled that hospitals don't provide sexual assault exams. And together we wrote the Survivors Access to Supportive Care Act. And I got to go to DC and lobby for it. I got Lisa Murkowski and Bernie Sanders co-sponsored on the same piece of legislation, which is something I'm really proud of. And after 8 years of hard effort, we passed that bill as part of the Violence Against Women Act and made more access to sexual assault kits for survivors. The other individual lawmaker that got back to me was Representative Tina Orwell in Des Moines in the 33rd, our neighbors to the south. And together we founded the Sexual Assault Forensic Examination Working Group and spent the last decade transforming how systems function. So by the end of this year, we'll have ended the rape kit backlog in Washington. We'll have tested all 11,000 untested kits. We got trauma-informed training for police. We got survivors' rights. We got hospital protocols. We got the first in the nation rape kit tracking system so that survivors can watch through the system. And what I've realized the last decade or so of doing this work is when I go to Olympia to try to affect change, who has the ear of the lawmakers? And what I know is that, survivors, we didn't have a lobbyist. We didn't have special interests. We didn't have money. It was us coming in and tearing open our trauma and sharing our story over and over again to demand better. So that was a really long way to say, I want this job because I know what it's like to be a person with a problem in our community. And we need more lawmakers who know how to get things done. I've passed a dozen state bills and a federal law in my spare time as a regular person. We need lawmakers in Olympia who are going to prioritize the stories and the lived experiences of people in our community. And I know I can do that because I've been doing it. So I want to continue to make real change for real people.
What other issues do you think that you could bring that to?
So what's really interesting about the work that I've gotten to do is, a lot of people will say, oh, she's just a sexual assault survivor, like that's her only issue. I've actually gotten to work at the intersection of a variety of issues, right? I've gotten to work on healthcare. I've gotten to work on police reform. I've gotten to work on public safety. And what I've realized is that my issue can't be solved unless we solve greater problems in our society. If I want to prevent sexual violence, which is what I want to do, then we have to fully fund education, right? And as a teacher, I know that our kids don't have the resources that they need or deserve. We need more librarians in schools. We need more nurses in schools. We need more psychiatrists, psychologists in schools, counselors. Our paramount duty in the legislature is to fund public education for our kids, and we're still not doing that adequately. I believe in universal health care. When I got turned away from the hospital because they didn't provide rape kits, everybody thought you go to the hospital. That's what you do. But in our current system, having a program with sexual assault nurse examiners is a money-losing operation for a hospital. So if we have a healthcare system that's built around profit, these absolutely necessary public services that aren't profitable, they're the first pieces that go. So if we're going to have a healthcare system that actually prioritizes the healthcare of people, I don't believe that can be a for-profit healthcare system. So I've endorsed Whole Washington. I think that the bluest LD in the state of Washington should elect a leader who is willing to be a leader on hard, radical change, on big things that actually make our lives better. I think that what we've seen in the pandemic is, we can have better. And people are saying this isn't good enough. The people who have made life changes and seen what we can do when we have a crisis, we can make testing available. We can make vaccines available to people. But we have a system that has chosen not to. And I think we can do better and we deserve better.
You mentioned it taking 8 years for a bill that you worked on. So are all of these things long hauls too? Do you see anything that can be nibbled at, in say, your first term?
Oh, absolutely. So 8 years, that's a federal bill. And I think that's the difference between federal and state work, is federal law takes a considerable amount of time. I've worked on 12 state bills in the time that it took to pass the one federal bill. As far as nibbling away, I think one of the things that I'm ready to lead on out the gate is abortion access in Washington. Because, I'm not talking about organizing that I did 20 years ago when I was in college on abortion access. I'm in that fight. I've been in that fight. I spent my summer of 2020 during the pandemic not baking sourdough starters, but going to every legislative district in the state to organize for the R90 campaign to make sure that our students had access to sexual health education in schools. And we won that initiative by 20 points when people thought we were going to be down. So I'm really proud of that work. I've been serving on the coalition for the Keep Our Care Act to make sure that we have the ability to limit hospital mergers, that limit abortion access and gender affirming care and end of life care. So I am in this work on abortion access. I think we have a lot to do around privacy of data when it comes to healthcare and women's healthcare tracking. There's a lot to be done there on online privacy. I think that we need to make sure that we pass the Keep Our Care Act so that we can preserve access. Working on access to rape kits, I know that having the legal right to a procedure doesn't guarantee meaningful access to it. And so our problem here in Washington is that we need to preserve our access as we have a 385% increase in pregnant people coming into the state to seek abortion health care. We need to make sure that we are prioritizing funding for clinics, especially on the border of Idaho. Oregon has an abortion fund. I think that we should have that as well. I think that we need to regulate crisis pregnancy centers because they are going to continue to try to trick pregnant people into not receiving the health care that they need. And I'm ready to pass legislation on all of those.
Getting back to education, which you mentioned early on, and also which, as you mentioned, you've been working in the schools. Any specific bills or specific proposals that you think that should be tackled first to try to fix the inequity? I
think what's so frustrating is that we've passed a lot of meaningful bills. We haven't funded them, right? So in 2014, we passed an initiative of the people that said more teachers, lower class size, more librarians, more counselors. And then it never got funded. And we got to put our money where our mouth is. And so, I want to continue the work of the initiative like the one in 2014 that we've made our voice heard, our stance clear as people, and we deserve a legislature that's going to fund that.
Where should we get the funding?
So let's talk about taxes. So first of all, I'm in favor of a wealth tax. I think that the tax code that we have in Washington is the most upside down, I know that it's the most upside down tax structure in the entire country. So it's so important that we turn it right side up. And one way we can do that is with a wealth tax. I also know that we have 750-ish tax exemptions on the records that disproportionately benefit the wealthy. I think that we need to take a look at that. I think that there are areas where we could have more robust programming if we remove the high-end cap on the funding mechanism. For instance, the paid family medical leave caps out at $147,000 a year. So if you make less than $147,000 a year, like I do, X percent of our entire income goes into paid family medical leave. If you make more than $147,000 a year, X amount of that first $147,000 you make goes into that fund, and then the rest of your wealth is not taxed. So we could make that program more robust if we simply removed the tax exemption for our wealthiest citizens. And then, I think that there is the potential for a state income tax. And I think that if we're going to get to a state income tax, we need to be really thoughtful about pairing that with repealing taxes that are regressive. So talk about what we can do to repeal some B&O tax or some sales tax, and make sure that we can transform our tax code in a way that brings in the funds that we need to do this programming and doesn't harm workers and small business. That's a long haul.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is that everything takes resources, everything takes money. So, the aspect of someone who's not an elected official, as you haven't been while you've fought for all these things for the past years, is that really what is that what it takes in the legislature? Is there I'm dismayed to hear that one state legislator basically responded to you. Do you think that's a mindset that you hope to bring that's different?
Yeah, I think that there are so many entities vying for the attention of lawmakers. Right? Think about every business organization, every nonprofit organization, every interest group that has money. They have a lobbyist that is there making meetings, that knows how the system works, that have professionals, and get that attention. And when you're just a regular person in the community suffering, and you send an email, I think that there's less incentive to respond to that, and my experience bears that out. When Senator Murray and Tina Orwell responded, it changed my life. I've spent the last decade with them making substantive change for myself, for my community, for other survivors, for public safety, for our healthcare system. And I want that to happen more often. I want regular people who struggle, who have a problem, to be empowered to make that change. Because we did it together. Right? Senator Murray, Tina Orwell, they didn't do that for me. I didn't do this on my own. We did this together. And that's what government should be, is the people working with the people for the people's business. And so often in Olympia, it's not that. So I'm running because we deserve that.
What have you been hearing from people out on the campaign trail of things that they'd like you to fight for if elected?
Well, the number one thing that I'm hearing on the campaign trail, one is abortion access. That, I think, was borne out in some polling that Crosscut did in Washington as well. People are very concerned. I've been hearing a lot about gun safety. We're having shootings that aren't even making the news, and we need to do more on that. So as a Alliance for Gun Responsibility endorsed candidate and a pro-choice Washington endorsed candidate, I'm ready to lead on those issues. I also know that people are concerned about safety in their community. And, I've spent the last several years working on holding violent criminals accountable for what they've done. And I understand personally and viscerally the need to feel safe in your community. And I know that I can make a difference there as well.
That's something that I actually did want to ask you more about, since you've been working on that, and that's going to be an issue for everybody. And the legislature has a unique position of making the laws, as opposed to, here on the local level, everybody, police, prosecutors, et cetera. So what do you think, are there any particular things that you'd like to see reformed or changed that you plan to propose?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I care a lot about as a victim of a violent crime is prison reform. I had the opportunity to tour the Monroe Correctional Facility a couple of years ago, and what I saw in that facility devastated me. I saw the faces of men in a small window, isolated in a room by themselves, laboring for 42 cents an hour, which is slavery. And those facilities are designed to punish. And if we want real public safety, if we want to actually make our communities safer and better and more resilient, we cannot continue to have a justice system that is focused around retribution, that is based in punishment. We have to have a system that actually helps people rehabilitate and be better neighbors. So what I would want to see is access to mental health care for people who harm other people, access to real job training, access to economic motivators that can help them actually succeed as neighbors and citizens. Because if we continue on the path that we've been on, we put people in jail, we put people in prison, we punish them, we heap trauma on trauma, and when then they come back out into the community, they're going to continue to offend and recidivate. And this cycle just continues over and over and over. We have to break that cycle.
People would expect that to be an unusual position from someone who's been a victim.
It might be. I think that there's a tendency to want revenge, right? To want punishment, to want somebody to suffer when they've caused you to suffer. And I think that it's where I've landed is I don't want to continue to heap trauma on people, and I want to make sure that we have actual public safety. And if we're going to actually prevent assaults, if we're going to actually prevent violent crime, the actual way to do this, and all of the studies show, is to spend time and focus rehabilitating people and making them better. And I think at the end of the day, do I want punishment or do I want a safe community? And I think most of us say we want a safe community.
Is there any place that you've learned about that actually is making that work, that concept?
I think if we look at a lot of European countries and how their carceral system works, we could start there. We have the highest incarceration rate, I think, in the world. It's the amount of people that we throw into traumatizing environments that are already at their lowest, and then expect them somehow to come out and do better. It just doesn't make any sense.
Even before getting to that point, though, there are some specifics, such as I want to ask about one particular specific thing that's being suggested to legislators. Mm-hmm. Do you have a position on the bill from a recent session that restricted law enforcement pursuits?
Yeah, I stand behind that. That's best practices. I think a lot of the offices, the precincts that are having a hard time with that, or the departments that are having a hard time with that, it's something new, right? But a lot of departments, that has been the best practice for many years. So I don't think it's as radical of a piece of legislation as some people think. I think that there are departments who've been behind and have not been using best practices that are evidence-based. And this law simply brought everybody to the evidence-based best practice that a lot of departments have already been using.
So on another issue, something that I would expect the legislature to be spending a lot of time again on housing / homelessness. Tell me about some of your thoughts and observations on that.
We need to change our zoning laws. There isn't enough housing in the state of Washington. We're 250,000 units short of just having the basic stock that we need to house people in our community. We need to build more housing. And I think that I was sad that Jessica Bateman's bill didn't pass last year, which is the missing middle housing bill that would have allowed for duplexes and triplexes in all neighborhoods in Seattle. We need to build more housing. I think that's the long and the short of it.
But for the more specific, not just so that there's more housing available to people, but in terms of all the the funding for interventions in homelessness and what the state can do. What do you think the state should be doing? Maybe that it's not doing or not doing properly.
I think that a lot of this is local. I think a lot of what's been going on should have been handled better by the city and county and hasn't. I think that what the legislature can do is the big zoning changes, is making sure that we're funding the permanent supportive housing that is going to be necessary for some people who are experiencing homelessness. But I don't think that that's everybody. I think that we do have a stock problem.
On to climate.
Yeah.
Tell me about some of your issues and passions there.
Yeah. One, transit is a climate issue. I'm really proud to be supported by the Amalgamated Transit Union and the Transit Writers Union. I use public transit every day. I am a public transit user, and I think that we need to make sure that we're funding transit in a way that makes it consistent and easy for people to get around our city without having to rely on a car. So that's one area. I also think that we, especially here in the 34th, especially getting SODO into our district and redistricting, we have this huge opportunity to invest in real clean energy infrastructure. I've been talking with members of the Port of Seattle, and I'm endorsed by 4 out of 5 of the port commissioners. And one of the things that we've been talking a lot about is the liquid fuel. So looking at how we've got fossil fuels in these large cargo ships, and using electricity is not going to work in the foreseeable future. So the idea of having a clean liquid fuel that we can use for container ships. And then part of that is going to be building the energy infrastructure we need to produce that fuel. So one of the proposals is offshore wind. And I think that we're in a great position to invest in renewable clean energy like offshore wind and make sure that we're doing what we can there.
Is that something that can be done in our state?
Yeah. Yeah, California is already working on that. And I know that there are things in the works for making it happen here in Washington as well.
On transit, what specifically can the legislature do other than just say, here's more money?
I think we need more money. I think it's also making sure that we have strong laws that protect unions, strong laws that protect workers, and making sure that we have the funding for infrastructure that makes our roadways safe and usable.
So, in terms of our specific area,
Yeah.
you mentioned it in briefly just a moment ago in terms of SODO and the port and so forth. Any particular issues that are of a special import to the 34th that you want to advocate for?
Well, I think the ferry system is one that I've certainly heard a lot about, especially from our friends on Vashon. But making sure that we have one, that we can start to electrify our ferry fleet, because they're running on diesel right now. So I think that we have a lot to do to make sure that we have cleaner vessels, and then making sure that we are investing in the workers that make our ferry system function. So again, making sure that we're funding our ferry systems.
So with so many issues needing more money,
Yeah.
what might the state be spending too much on that could be redirected, do you
Oh.
think?
That's a great question. I think one of the areas is we've got 750 tax breaks, right? That I said before, we need to look at those. And I really believe that we need to find additional revenue. And I think that that revenue can be found in a wealth tax and by advocating for a progressive income tax.
But nothing that we should be spending less on or that funding could be redirected from?
I'm sure there is. I would love, I haven't gone through the budget line by line, but I would love to take a look at that.
If you're elected, are you going to be able to keep your job as a school librarian?
I'm gonna be a full-time legislator. I'm fortunate enough that my income is actually a lateral move to what state legislators make, so I'll be able to focus all my time and energy just working on helping solve problems with my neighbors.
Any other radical ways that you plan to do this job if you get it?
I think prioritizing people is pretty radical, based on what I've seen.
So, in closing, any particular things that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure that people know about you, about the issues that you're going to work on?
No, I think that I would just want people to know that I'm a regular working person, that I've worked as a school librarian, I've worked as a server every summer until the pandemic. I know what it's like to struggle in this economy. I know what it's like to struggle in the state. I know your concerns. I feel your concerns. And we can't just elect people to solve problems for us. I fundamentally believe that if we're going to have a better society, to have better systems, that we have to do it together.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.